Good morning. I'm Bear from the internet. We're going to do the brief today, 13 April 23. If you're new here, subscribe, ring the little bell icon. That helps us in our ongoing battle against the YouTube algorithmic robots. If you're not new here, you know what to do. Share the show with somebody that you love. Please and thank you. Of course, the brief is brought to you by Refuge Medical, whom I am the founder and CEO of, but we'll talk more about that later. Bear Independent Brief, 13 April 23. The conflict in Asia continues to sow division between the countries of the world. France's President Emmanuel Macron has taken a very separate stance from the West and even said in a recent interview that, quote, "The worst thing would be to think that we Europeans must become followers on this topic and adapt to the American rhythm or a Chinese overreaction," end quote. This is just another indicator of the decline of the American empire. The Age of Empires, Sir John Glubb. The Fate of Empires, Sir John Glubb, approximately 250 years. Ray Dalio, with separate research, came up with approximately 250 years. Another study showed that the average age of an empire is 2.7 centuries, aka 270 years. So, America, regardless of whether we want it to or not, is nearing the end of the age of America 1.0. What happens in 2.0, we don't know. But the American hegemony around the world and our ability to exert influence and build rapport and use force if necessary around the world is unfortunately shrinking. Nature abhors a void, which is why there has been so much talk of China filling that void. It's also worth pointing out, though, from a big picture strategic overview, that China coming onto the world stage as the international superpower, the lone international superpower, is not only part of China's long-term strategic plan, but it's also something that's being pushed by the World Economic Forum, which is why I think we're seeing a controlled demolition of the economy in the United States of America because of this green tech and this wokeness and ESG and social credit scores and dependence on foreign oil rather than being what am I looking for here? There's a beautiful blue jay outside. Oh, look at the squirrel. Rather than being self-sufficient in the production of our own fuel and energy here in the United States of America. All this is intentional, and our representative republic is filled with representatives that do not actually represent us, which is why this has been allowed to happen, encouraged to happen over the last few decades. The rest of Europe did not appear to appreciate Macron's comment, to say the least. German MP Norbert Röttgen tweeted, I love the fact that tweets are news now. Insert sarcasm here. Norbert Röttgen tweeted that Macron had turned his China trip into, quote, a PR coup for Xi and a foreign policy disaster for Europe, end quote, and that Macron was, quote, increasingly isolating himself in Europe, end quote. There's some excellent French Milsurp rifles on the market, only been dropped twice and never fired. France is an interesting country, historically, and Macron is no Napoleon. Just throwing that out there. Seems to, yes, and see, this is something that people miss too when they talk about how we need to go to guns to take our country back, and the 3%ers in the American Revolution. Study history, please, study history. Those 3%ers, those who fought for liberty to establish this country, to get away from the tyranny of the British, which I'm a big fan of, by the way. I love the concept of independence and freedom. But those freedom fighters had a lot of help. A lot of help. General Lafayette, anyone? The French? There's not, that I'm aware of, lots of countries who are lining up to help those who currently believe in freedom in the United States of America to fight tyranny at home or abroad. So that's a key factor that's missing. If there's going to be a Revolution 2.0 in the United States of America, where is your war material? Where are your logistical support mechanisms? Where is that? Where's your propaganda machine? It doesn't exist, and that's a key factor in order to be able to perpetuate, we'll call it resistance on the home front. Do I have that book in here? I do not. It's elsewhere. I have some very good books in here, though. More squirrels. Here's one. Total Resistance by Von Dock. This is a legendary work by the famed Swiss expert on guerrilla warfare, Major H. Von Dock. Survivalists have rediscovered this important study on resistance and underground operations, some making it the keystone of their libraries. Well written and illustrated with easy-to-understand drawings, Total Resistance analyzes and overviews the techniques needed to overcome an invading force, formation of guerrilla units, weapons, food and medical considerations, ambushes, sabotage, and much more. It's under 20 doll hairs, and it's a relatively small book. But as far as affecting a resistance to tyranny in the United States of America, during this period of controlled demolition of America 1.0, because we are at the end of the age of this empire, as the system continues to shatter and fall, what are you going to do to be able to survive the collapse of said systemic system? And who out there in the world is rallying to the war cry of the Americans for freedom? Where's that external support? Just like we saw in the Revolutionary War, where's that external support? See, the French had a bone to pick with the English, and so they were quite happy to assist the Americans in their war against the English. I don't see that right now globally. Shall we continue? Yes, please, let us continue. Even the spokesperson for the French embassy in the United States commented, quote, "The U.S. is our ally with whom we share our values," quote. And the EU High Representative Joseph Borrell said, quote, that the EU stands united and our transatlantic community remains also united, end quote. Former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said, quote, "What Macron did is absolutely indecent to reject all we have done for France and for Europe over the last 60, 70 years, end quote. So Macron is either a coward or he sees the writing on the wall and he's positioning his country to be friendly with China, or both. Or he's a politician. Meanwhile, Ukraine is pressuring India to step up and help resolve the conflict in Ukraine. The first deputy minister of Ukraine's foreign ministry, Iman Zaparova, said at the Indian Council of World Affairs, quote, "There is one message with which I have come to India. Ukraine really wants India and Ukraine to be closer. Yes, there is a history between us, but we want to start a new relationship with India," end quote. So far, India has balked at taking sides, abstaining several times from voting against Moscow in UN resolutions and from condemning Russia's actions. It's not surprising, considering that the country depends on Russia for more than half of its defense equipment and purchases great quantities of Russian oil, saving the equivalent of roughly $3.6 billion by doing so. India's in an interesting place. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, plus BRICS. So geopolitically, India is aligned with China, Russia, etc., Saudi Arabia. And India is an emerging nation, a billion people that is quickly becoming one of the factories of the world. Much like China has been called the factory of the world, India is spinning up their not just agricultural production, or at least attempting to. They've been dealing with some environmental factors regarding that, but also manufacturing. India is building out their manufacturing plant. And again, they have a billion people. They're also, geographically, they share a border, much of which is contested with China, and there have been skirmishes over the years between India and China along that line of actual conflict, I believe, line of actual control, they call it. So there have been ongoing issues there. So where would India stand? India is likely going to do what's best for India. They are also, I believe, a nuclear power. So that's interesting strategically. Even countries who appear to be relatively neutral in the conflict may not be. A leaked U.S. intelligence document has revealed that Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi ordered a covert shipment of 40,000 rockets to Russia. Covert specifically to avoid angering the West. On paper, Egypt is supposed to be one of the closest allies of the United States in the Middle East, and it receives much aid from America as well. An anonymous U.S. official said of the secret plan, quote, "We are not aware of any execution of that plan," end quote. So in other words, Egypt is supplying 40,000 rockets to Russia for their war in Ukraine, but they don't know if that order has been fulfilled yet. Egypt, which we send a significant amount of U.S. aid to, and we're also supposed to be strategic partners with, is in agreement to arm our enemy in Ukraine. Now, the powers that be here in the United States of America will very likely not do much about that. If I was president for a day, I would remove all funding from Egypt. That's a slap in the face as far as I'm concerned. However, it would require us, the Americans, to acknowledge at some level that what is happening in Ukraine is not simply a war between Ukraine and Russia, but it is a proxy war between the United States, ergo NATO, and Russia on the chessboard of Ukraine. It's also come out officially that there are American boots on the ground in Ukraine. That's interesting. These being more of these leaked documents that the New York Times and others are reporting on that are coming straight from the Pentagon. Now, it used to be when you leaked intel from the Pentagon that you got stood in front of a brick wall and a firing squad took care of you. Not anymore. Why? Controlled demolition of the system. This is intentional. It's all intentional. But if I was president for a day, we'd be back to the firing squads. Yet another recently leaked document has revealed Russian intelligence officers bragging about undermining the relationship between the UAE, United Arab Emirates, and both the United States and the UK. FSB officials claimed that UAE security service officials and Russia agreed to partner against the US and the UK intelligence agencies. It should be noted, however, that this document's veracity cannot be determined at this time. The battle is clearly not just between Russia and Ukraine, or even the United States and China. The tension has spread around the world, a complicated push and pull of political loyalties, businesses, and aid. Countries are pressured to take sides publicly and show their support with practical action, though something very different may be happening behind closed doors. Alliances are being either strengthened or shaken, and military arsenals are being updated and upgraded, bolstered and prepared. A Trafalgar Group study showed that 56.7% of the GOP, Republican Party here in the United States, believe that we are on the brink of another world war, and 47% of nonpartisans believe the same. So, between 47 and 56% of folks believe that we're on the brink of another world war. Likely. I would say likely. And here's why I would say likely. Because war is, at its most basic foundational level, the game of allocating resources towards the acquisition of or defense of other certain resources. And there's a period of scarcity that's been constructed at this point. There's a period of scarcity coming, and people will go to war over basic things. Why does Russia want Ukraine? Well, strategically they want Ukraine because they say that they don't want NATO on their border, although it's been brought up many times that if they take Ukraine, they'll be literally next door to NATO. So, from a military standpoint, I don't know how much credence that claim has. There are people in Ukraine, Russian-speaking people in Ukraine, so that helps the Russian demography. There's also industrial plants, manufacturing, and agriculture in Ukraine. Russia's a very difficult place to grow food in. Large swaths of the country, you simply cannot produce food in Russia. And their demography, the Russian demography, is trash. So if we look at Ukraine from that standpoint, it makes sense. China has a very large population that they've had a hard time feeding over the years. And let's never forget that communism has killed more people than anything else on the face of the earth, and those people that it's killed has been largely its own. Roughly 1 million people a year died under the Soviet system from starvation. And that was not like, oh, there's no food. No, it's you just don't get food. You get to starve to death. It's a big deal. I believe that we are in the midst of a controlled demolition of the system. I've said that word 4 times now because it rung like a bell to me when I heard a brother say it recently. It makes sense. If you were to map all the actions that our leadership here in the United States of America has taken over not just the last few years, but over decades, it's a controlled demolition. Another interesting note, Ford Motor Company recently filed a patent for self-driving cars. Not like Tesla self-driving cars that are going to drive you around. No, Ford's patent is for something a little bit more sinister. It's absolutely an economic indicator. If you miss your payments, the car will automatically lock itself and drive itself back to the nearest dealership. I would say that's an economic indicator. Now, last little bit of information for the day. The Passover 2024 period of time. So about a year, a little bit less than a year from now. Actually about 50 weeks from now. The day when the moon would be sighted to determine the exact date of the Passover, there won't be a moon. There won't be a sun. There'll be a complete solar eclipse on that day. The skies will be dark. So that is a biblical sign, Genesis chapter 1, in conjunction with a high holy day, Moedim, appointed times. I don't get too wrapped around the axles about dates and times, and I certainly am not into astrology or anything like that. But when I first learned that, it gave me goosebumps. I was talking with a brother about that recently, and somebody had been talking to him that was unaware of the conversation that he and I had been having about this lunar eclipse. And this other person had said that the lunar eclipse, or the solar eclipse that happened in 2017, they felt represented the initiation of the 7 years of fat, going back to the story of Joseph, the 7 fat cows and the 7 lean cows in the book of Genesis. And that this next solar eclipse, coming in conjunction with the High Holy Day in 2024, represents the beginning of the 7 years of lean. Now, I don't know if that's true, but it feels right in my soul, that assessment of that. And so I'm simply passing on to you, by that timeline, we have 50 more weeks of the fat times, knowing that we have rampant inflation, and we'll probably have deflation as a result at some point, which is going to create a huge amount of economic instability in the United States of America. Our debt is untenable. Couple that with the age of an empire, approximately 250 years, which we are on the cusp of turning over into whatever comes next in the United States of America. Couple that with the controlled demolition of the system here in the United States of America. It appears that we have approximately a year left of the fat times. And one would say, well, is it the fat times? Everything's so expensive and, it's hard to acquire. And yes, but you can still buy it. You can still acquire it. So, this is not me prophesying, but this is me saying that my household is putting its foot on the accelerator when it comes to preparedness. And ultimately, let's say nothing does happen. Let's say everything's fine. We'll be fine too. It is not going to hurt me to have more solar, to have more rainwater catchment, to have more animal and vegetable agriculture, to have more food put back, to be more independent of the broken, fragile system. That's the goal. That's what we intend to do. I've said it before tongue in cheek, but I mean it. I would like to find out that the world has ended a few weeks later when somebody comes and tells me. That's how independent of the system I would like to be. I'm not there yet, but I'm certainly on the path. And I intend to stay there on the path and keep working towards the direction of, if a systemic collapse happens, it doesn't directly affect me and the people that I love, because our working foundational thesis for what preparedness is perpetuating normalcy for the people that we love. Global tyranny, economic collapse, war, famine, plague, and disease is not normalcy. That's the type of thing I would like to insulate to the best of my ability the people that I love from. And so we intend to do that. Ear nugget for you. You should research that Passover 2024 eclipse. That's the brief for today. If you're one of those people that jumps off when it's time to talk about how to support the show, this is your polite invitation to beat feet, skedaddle, get out of here, have a blessed day. Shalom. For everybody else, all these links are in the description. Patreon, $5 per month. There's a link in the description of every live stream and video. So, just put a video up on Patreon yesterday talking about how to sharpen a chainsaw. And I guess most people don't know how to sharpen a chainsaw. There's also a lot of foundational knowledge in there about what a chainsaw is and how a chainsaw works and what the rakers do and the gullet versus the top plate and how to tension your chain and how to swap a chain and, blah, 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 blah. Stuff that I take for granted because I've been running chainsaws for more than 20 years, more than 25 years. So that video is up on Patreon. And Patreon is not only a $5 per month prepper consultancy where you ask the questions and I answer them. It's also an alternate platform to YouTube here. That if things ever go fully sideways here at YouTube, which by the way I have 2 community guideline strikes, I get one more and this channel is gone. Thanks YouTube. We'll still be over at Patreon. So, link in the description. Refuge Medical. Bare Facts are in stock. The Bare First Aid Kit, Bare Facts. It's the best first aid kit on planet Earth, made in America, guaranteed forever. 71 lives saved to date. I recommend you check that out. We also have potassium iodide in stock. KIO3, warheads on foreheads, non-nuclear pills so that you don't die of radiation. That is in stock today. They sell out every day. Every time we have them in stock, they sell out. So I recommend you go check that out. refugemedical.com. There's a link in the description. Also, the bleeding prevention kits. I know times are tough for a lot of people. That's why all of our kits are HSA and FSA eligible, and the bleeding prevention kit is $59. And it's got a tourniquet and a pressure bandage and wound packing gauze and gloves and a Mylar blanket and an emergency trauma dressing and an instructional card and all that stuff in there in a shrink-wrapped bag that'll fit in a glove box or in a backpack or in a desk drawer or in the cabinet at your wood shop or your welding shop or your whatever. And it's absolutely critical for treating arterial bleeding in the extremities and the junctional areas. So, $59, the bleeding prevention kit, check that out. And then all of our, individual first aid kits, our medium-sized bags like the Adventure Kit and the Stomp Bag and the Field Explorer backpack-sized kits, all that stuff's in stock. And when I say in stock, I mean it's under my roof and it will ship to you quickly. We're not waiting for it to arrive. So please check that out if you're interested. Again, potassium iodide in stock. Today, it will sell out. refugemedical.com. Refuge Training. There are a handful of classes left in Boise, Idaho. If you're anywhere in that portion of the world, Boise, Idaho is your class. Responder 1, Responder 2, Responder 3. Responder 1 is the March algorithm and stop the bleed. And you will do reps and sets. You will apply tourniquets. You will pack wounds. We talk about massive bleeding, airway, respiratory, circulation, head injury, hypothermia, and then everything else. Responder 2 builds on Responder 1, where we talk about CPR and AED and a little bit of tactical training in there, and then you begin scenario-based training, where you will work motor vehicle accidents and etc., hands-on reps and sets. And Responder 3 is the follow-on to Responder 1 and 2, and it's a 10-hour tactical medical course where you will do force-on-force and individual and team scenarios, and you will do tactical medicine under pressure. And there's nothing else like it in the world when it comes to civilian medical training. That's not me saying that. That's now 6 Green Berets who have taken the class and a number of Naval Special Warfare personnel who have taken the class and who are blown away at the fact that we are providing that level of training to civilians. refugetraining.com. Check out the Boise, Idaho classes. Lastly, Grindstone Ministries. We have recon teams headed back to Mississippi, Rolling Fork, Mississippi right now to determine the state of the mud, because Mississippi mud is a real thing. And so if we determine that the mud is good to go, we can get back out there and get back to work. We'll be headed back that way shortly. There's more rain forecasted for today and for Saturday in that area, and so time will tell. But the moment the mud lets up, we'll be back. We already have equipment staged there. We have the fob set up. We're just waiting for it to dry out enough for us to be able to get in and do the work that we do. If you'd like to support that, our disaster relief, you can go to grindstoneministries.com. There's a donate button there. Also sign up for the newsletter, and then you will stay informed about when we deploy and where we deploy and what to bring when we deploy, etc. You can also help fund Caleb House, which is our restoration facility for juvenile human trafficking survivors. We have 24 kiddos ages 1 to 19 in our care currently that we're taking care of. Can't do that without you. So thank you. There's also links to Caleb House swag, t-shirts and long sleeves and hoodies. And yes, they're expensive because so is anti-human trafficking. You can also find a link to our brother Saw's shirt, the Facts Not Feeling shirt, that portion of the proceeds of which help to go fund Caleb House, and as well as our brother Saw's, or our brother Rex's t-shirt as well. A portion of the proceeds help to go fund Caleb House. That's the brief for today. I appreciate y'all very much. Have a blessed day. Shalom.